Welcome back to Healing is a Messy Bitch. This is Amy Wilhelmy. All right, here we are at week 40, which honestly feels a little surreal. I might cry today. Over the past 40 weeks, we've explored a lot of ideas together. We've talked about trauma, attachment, relationships, sex therapy, EMDR, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, cultural humility, ethics, psychedelic research, neuroscience, even AI, which is a lot of ground to cover in 40 conversations. And if there's one thing that becomes clear when you zoom out and look at all of these topics, it's this. Healing is complicated. It's layered, it's nonlinear, and sometimes it's messy. Actually, a lot of time it's messy because real healing rarely follows a perfectly organized treatment plan. It usually looks more like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, breakthroughs, followed by confusion, growth, followed by moments of doubt. And yet, despite all that complexity, there's one theme that shows up again and again across almost every field we've talked about in psychology: neuroscience, attachment, research, trauma therapy, even psychedelic research. And that theme is something surprisingly simple. Healing is relational. One of the central insights of trauma research is that trauma often disrupts a person's sense of safety in those relationships. And when people experience overwhelming events, especially involving betrayal, abandonment, or violence, the nervous system learns something important. It learns that connection can be dangerous. So the brain and the body develop strategies to protect against it. Sometimes those strategies look like emotional withdrawal. Sometimes they look like hypervigilance. Sometimes they look like people-pleasing or perfectionism. Sometimes they look like shutting down completely. And all of these patterns make sense from a survival perspective. They help someone get through something difficult. But over time, those same protective patterns can make intimacy feel complicated because the nervous system is trying to keep someone safe, even when the danger is no longer present. This is where attachment research becomes incredibly important. Attachment theory was originally developed by psychologist John Bowlby. I've said this lots of times before, and it suggests that human beings are biologically wired for connection. From infancy onward, relationships help regulate the nervous system. When caregivers are responsive and supportive, the brain learns that the world is relatively safe. When relationships are unpredictable or unsafe, the brain learns to stay on guard. But here's the really hopeful part of attachment research. Those patterns are not permanent. The brain can learn new emotional regulation experiences. And when people experience relationships that feel emotionally safe and responsive, the nervous system begins to update its expectations, which means healing often happens through relationships. This is one reason that therapy can be so powerful. Therapy is not just about techniques. It's not just about analyzing thoughts or processing memories or interventions. At its core, therapy is a relationship where someone is listened to carefully, where their experiences are taken seriously, when they're remembered, where emotional vulnerability is met with empathy rather than judgment. Those experiences may seem simple, but for many people, they are profoundly corrective. In psychology, there's a phrase for this. It's called corrective emotional experience. A corrective emotional experience occurs when somebody encounters a relational dynamic that differs from past painful experiences. For example, someone who expects rejection may instead encounter acceptance. Someone who expects criticism may encounter compassion. And slowly the nervous system begins to learn that connection can be safe again. Over the past 40 weeks, we've explored several different therapy models. Each of these approaches addresses a different aspect of healing. For example, EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, process traumatic memories so they can no longer carry the same emotional intensity. Then we have EFT, or emotionally focused therapy, which focuses on restoring emotional connection in relationships. We also talked about somatic therapies, which help people reconnect with the body and body awareness, because trauma often lives in the nervous system as much as it lives in memory. And we explored emerging treatments like ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Ketamine, again, ketamine treatments may increase something called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to form new neural pathways. When therapy occurs during periods of increased neuroplasticity, emotional learning may become more flexible. But what's really important to understand is that none of these therapies exist in isolation. They work best when they're integrated. Trauma processing, relational healing, body awareness, emotional insight, all of these elements interact, and healing is rarely one-dimensional. One of these themes that's appeared again and again throughout this series is the connection between the body and the emotional experience. Trauma is not just stored in memories, it's stored in the nervous system. It's stored in muscle tension, in breathing patterns, in instinctive reactions, which is why body-based practices can play an important role in recovery. Things like mindfulness, breath work, movement, yoga, time in nature, these practices help the nervous system shift from states of chronic alertness into states of rest and regulation. And when the nervous system feels safer, emotional healing becomes easier. Healing is messy. Now, here's the part that I always like to remind people about. Healing is not a perfectly organized process. It's messy, it's nonlinear. Sometimes people experience major breakthroughs, and sometimes they feel like they're right back where they started. That doesn't mean that therapy isn't working. It usually means the nervous system is learning something new. And learning often happens through repetition, growth, reflection, setbacks, and insight all happen along the way. Healing is not becoming a perfectly regulated human being. It's about becoming more compassionate towards ourselves and others, which brings us to the title of this final episode, Love is Medicine. Now, when we say that, we're not talking about romantic love alone. We're talking about the broader human experience of care and connection. Empathy, compassion, understanding, supportive relationships. All of these experiences influence the nervous system in powerful ways. Research consistently shows that social connection improves mental and physical health. Supportive relationships help regulate stress hormones. They improve resilience. They strengthen emotional well-being, which means that love, in its many forms, plays a central role in healing. As mental health care continues to evolve, we will likely see more integration between different disciplines. Neuroscience, trauma therapy, relational therapy, somatic practices, emerging psychedelic treatments. Technology may also play a role. It already is. Tools like neurofeedback and digital mental health platforms may expand access to care. But regardless of how technology evolves, the core of healing will probably remain the same. People helping other people navigate suffering and growth. Because at its heart, therapy is still a deeply human process. If there's one idea I hope people take away from this series and this week 40 journey, it's that healing is possible even when trauma has shaped someone's life for a long time. Even when relationships feel very complicated, even when emotional patterns feel deeply ingrained. The brain can change. The nervous system can learn new experiences. Relationships can become safer. And people can rediscover parts of themselves that trauma once obscured. That process takes time. It takes patience and it often takes support, but it happens every day in therapy rooms, in families, in friendships, in communities, and sometimes simply through the experience of being seen and understood. Thank you for being a part of this conversation over the past 40 weeks and for exploring the messy, fascinating, deeply human journey of healing. Because in the end, the most powerful medicine might simply be this: connection and the courage to care for one another.